Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Mills. A warm welcome to people in the room here today in education, but also many of you from around the world. I know some of you it's morning, especially Maya, who's joining us from California, a very early morning, and for some of you it's the afternoon, but wherever you are, thank you for joining us. This is a conversation that I have been hoping to have for a while with colleagues who are presenting today. Maya Wing, based at the University of California, Riverside, Naifa Rashid at the University of Johannesburg, and Sadhu Haleta, who's based in Qatar, but also as a South African affiliation. And what they're going to do is they're going to reflect on how they're in dialogue together through their research, thinking about the connections between the role of universities in Israel and the role of universities in South Africa in relationship to both the history of apartheid, but also the history of Israel's actions against Palestine. So, with no further ado, just to tell you all that this is recorded, and we'll make it available tomorrow. We'll have about half an hour for the presentations, and then there'll be lots of time for questions and answers. So the screens are yours, and Saru and Mayor. I feel we're really looking forward to this. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Good. Well, I have to say good morning because I know Maya. For Maya, it's early in the morning. Good afternoon. Good evening. I'm in the Middle East, so it's evening for me. Thank you, everybody, for being there either in person or online. I'm really excited to talk about. I mean, excited is a tough word sometimes to talk about a very difficult topic, but I think it's an important topic that we have to talk about. We have to force ourselves to engage with these very important, difficult issues. I'll just talk very briefly, and then Maya and Naifa are going to speak in more detail, and then I'll come back later on for Q&A. I just wanted to briefly say how so Naifa and I are working on a research project where we looking at the parallels between and we're contrasting the ways that higher education was used as a tool of oppression during apartheid in South Africa and apartheid in Israel. And there are so many parallels, so many similarities between these two settings. In general terms, as settler colonies, using apartheid policies and tools of oppression. And I knew that there were similarities between the two settings, but it was only when I read Maya's book, Towers of Ivory and Steel, in December of last year, that I really started to get the detailed, comprehensive sense of the Israeli higher education. I've been working in South African higher education for quite some time, and I was very familiar with South African political history of higher education, but not necessarily in detail about Israeli higher education. But it literally, almost every other page was screaming at me, you know, kind of, you've seen this in the study of South African higher education during apartheid. And then I had an opportunity to engage with Naifa and her colleagues, and I mentioned this, and I told them to read Maya's book, and I said that, you know, I had this idea to do something to kind of put these two settings and their higher education under apartheid next to each other to see what they're telling us. So this is what Naifa and I have been working on, and I'm really glad that we are able to talk about that, our project, as well as have Maya speak about, you know, provide the insights from her book and her experience as well. And I really wanted to say, Maya, that, you know, you really have done something that a number of Palestinian scholars, even the people who have started the movement for boycott, academic boycott, Palestinian colleagues have been calling for something like this book that systematically shows what has happened in Israeli higher education. So the way that we're going to talk about this, Maya first will speak about her book and Israeli higher education. And then after that, Naifa is going to speak about the South African experience of higher education during apartheid. And then I'll come back to speak about some of the key issues and parallels that we have found in the comparison too.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hileta. And first, just to thank everyone who is joining us for the conversation today. Thank you so much to Dr. Mills for the invitation to join the series at the Center for Global Higher Education. And it really is an honor to be speaking alongside both Dr. Rashid and Dr. Hileta. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I know we have a lot to think through together, particularly at this moment. So today we're here to speak about higher education under apartheid regimes in settler colonial states. And we take this comparative lens because it helps us to identify the ways in which the university is a critical site in and through which the struggle for decolonization is waged and has always been waged. The University of the Colonized harbors tremendous liberatory potential. And of course, because of this, it becomes a site of brutal repression by the policing apparatuses of the colonizer. And we see this clearly in the case of the settler state of Israel. Just weeks into the genocide, Israel began the targeted destruction of every Palestinian university in Gaza. Palestinian students, faculty, and staff in Palestinian universities were always at the forefront of the Palestinian liberation struggle. And so Israel always understood Palestinian education as a threat to its rule and targeted it systematically at every turn. It, in fact, criminalized Palestinian higher education itself. Since their founding, Palestinian university campuses have been obstructed, raided, forced shut, and bombarded by Israel. This is a long-standing intentional destruction of Palestinian centers of education that has been conceptualized by Karman Abulsi as scholasticide. And then the other side of this entanglement is that the University of the Colonizer serves as a pillar of colonial governance. And we see this too in the case of the settler state of Israel. Israeli institutions of higher education have, from their founding, been settler universities. And what we mean by that is that they are embedded in the infrastructure that sustains Israeli society as a settler society. Of course, all settler colonial states are founded with the imperative to eliminate and replace the indigenous peoples of the lands on which they are built. To maintain their settler state, settlers must continually reassert their exclusive claim to the land, a project that requires narrative and intellectual scaffolding. In the case of the Israeli settler state, universities have served as foundational institutions to legitimize its eliminatory project and apartheid rule over the Palestinian people. Israeli universities produce expertise to internally sustain the Israeli settler state, as well as to sustain its international standing, which is becoming more of a crucial task, undermining global efforts to hold it to account. And over the course of the last 2 years, they have served as active agents in this escalated genocide. So I want to speak very briefly to 4 aspects of this imbrication of Israeli universities in colonial violence. First, the campuses themselves. From their founding, Israeli universities were conceived of as state-building institutions that would advance what Israel has called Judaization, the twinned program of expanding Jewish settlement across historic Palestine while shrinking lands in Palestinian possession and interrupting Palestinian territorial contiguity. This Judaization is the term that Israel has used that in the earlier decades, the Zionist project openly called colonization. Hebrew University was established in 1918 as a remote outpost at the apex of Mount Scopus to stake symbolic and political claim to the entire city of Jerusalem. And in the years since its founding, universities have followed suit. As Israel expanded new frontiers, it built new universities as regional outposts to anchor land grabs. In the largest city of the Galilee, the only region within 48 with a Palestinian majority remaining after the Nakba, Israel built the University of Haifa. In the center of the Nakab, the region most sparsely populated by Jewish Israelis, Israel built Ben Gurion University to aid in the replacement of Palestinian Bedouin communities. With the occupation of 1967, Hebrew University expanded its Mount Scopus campus into occupied East Jerusalem. And most recently, Ariel University, built to help expand the illegal settlement of Ariel in the heart of the occupied West Bank, became the latest accredited Israeli university. So the campuses of Israeli universities were themselves planned and built as pillars of regional demographic engineering. Second is academic training. All public universities offer their facilities, faculty, and expertise for Israeli military training to advance the career development of security state personnel and soldiers through a program called Atuda, Hebrew for Academic Reserve. Specialized degree granting programs developed to offer the Israeli military a cadre of highly educated and specialized soldiers amidst a national draft of high school seniors. At Tel Aviv University's faculties of social sciences and humanities, for instance, soldiers are currently enrolled in the Erez degree granting program to become officers in combat units, including those sent to Gaza. The Department of Islamic and Middle East Studies at Hebrew University is currently training intelligence corps soldiers through the degree program Chabatzalot, through which soldiers are offered linguistic and regional expertise to aid in the military apartheid rule of Palestinians, and since 2023, also in the creation of target banks in Gaza. Third, weapons development. On other corners of campuses, faculty and students have continually been working to develop weapons. Rafael, Elbit Systems, Israel Aerospace Industries, Israel's largest weapons producers and global exporters, originally fully state-owned, were birthed by Israeli universities and continue to be sustained by their laboratories to this day. Through collaboration with with every Israeli university, Israeli military industries currently develop and refine technologies and weapons used to commit war crimes against Palestinians and are then sold abroad as battle-proven on this basis. These include technologies and weapons used against Palestinians since October 2023. The Israeli Academy is, as Israeli experts and academics alike attest, the oxygen of Israeli military industries. Fourth and finally, knowledge production. Through their structural ties and collaborations with the Israeli state, Israeli academic disciplines have themselves become integral sites of knowledge production that maintain Israel's system of apartheid and the project to eliminate the Palestinian people. While examples abound across sciences, social sciences, and humanities, one we must attend to today is the field of legal studies. Legal infrastructure developed by faculty and research fellows at Israeli universities consistently shapes Israeli military operations and legitimizes their tactics. A key site for this innovation is Tel Aviv University's Institute for National Security Studies. The INSS has for decades facilitated collaboration between scholars and military leaders to produce scholarship to shield Israel from accountability for its war crimes and crimes against humanity, often in direct response to international condemnations or probes, and sometimes even anticipating them during Israeli operations in real time. The INSS legitimized Israeli war crimes in Gaza in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021. And in 2024, its scholars mobilized to offer legal expertise to thwart the South African petition charging Israel with committing genocide against the Palestinian people. Last year, the Birzeit Union of University Professors and Employees warned us of the lethal consequences of the, quote, forced ignorance of imperialism, and reiterated the call alongside all Palestinian faculty and student unions to enact the academic boycott and integrate and interrogate the complicity of our own universities in colonial violence. All of us who seek, as they put it, knowledge in the pursuit of freedom must heed their call. Thank you.
Maya, I really appreciate your reflection and your introductory thoughts, and hello to everyone who's joined us today. Good afternoon from really sunny and warm Johannesburg. So I am speaking to you today from a position of privilege. I have obviously the resources to be able to log in and share my views with you, and I just want to acknowledge the Palestinians and the Sudanese and the Congolese and every other nation around the world that is embroiled in conflict. And I just want to remember them, and I just want to acknowledge their suffering and hope that this piece of work that we're doing will make somewhat of a dent somewhere, somehow. So just to contribute to Maya's fantastic reflection, South African higher education during apartheid, obviously between 1948 and 1990, was structured in a very similar way. So I was hoping to take you through what that structure would be, just to set the scene for Savo, who will then give us a nice comparison and reflection between the two. So like the apartheid state of Israel, apartheid South Africa also used education as a tool. It was a really, really brutal aspect of South Africa's apartheid ideology. And why that was the case was because white South Africans received excellent quality education. Black, Indian, and mixed heritage South Africans received limited, controlled, and very inferior education, but they were still educated. Obviously, the varying levels of education reinforced a racial hierarchy, white supremacy, and Black dehumanization. So because there was this separation between 1948 and 1990 at South African higher education institutions, you had whites-only universities, blacks-only universities, Indians-only universities, and mixed heritage universities. Obviously, white universities, fully funded, autonomous, privileged, all sorts of advantages to studying there. Black, Indian, mixed heritage universities were obviously under-resourced, severely government-controlled, and had very little autonomy. I think the goal there, the goal of the South African apartheid government was to produce a small Black elite, Indian elite, and mixed heritage elite to serve apartheid bureaucracy. So it was a very strategic move for them to make sure that Black South Africans, Indian South Africans, and mixed heritage South Africans had access to some form of education. Obviously, the segregation originally began in the higher education space in South Africa under British colonialism, white institutions being modeled on European universities. And they were smaller missionary colleges that offered limited Eurocentric education to very few Black students. Obviously, post-1948, apartheid in South Africa deepened these hierarchies, particularly for Afrikaner socioeconomic and educational empowerment. So the Afrikaner population is, of course, very rooted in Dutch heritage. So obviously, there was a focus on Afrikaans universities because they were the key ideological tools of apartheid. You also had English-speaking universities, sometimes seen as liberal, but still beneficiaries of apartheid funding and privileges. White academia generally legitimized apartheid policies through some of their, let's say, pseudo-scientific authority. Black universities, severely controlled. There was a serious limit on their academic freedom. Political activism was seriously repressed. And that's something I want us to think carefully about. We have to be, especially in South Africa, for instance, or even in the other parts of the global South, how we have to think about how repressed are we really, or how free are we really to be able to express these views. Thinking about South Africa having taken Israel to the ICJ, one would think that South African higher education is quite free, quite a free, safe space for you to speak, but that's definitely not the case, which I think Savo will touch on very, very briefly. But that's quite scary because it means that progress is definitely not where it needs to be. But obviously, within Black universities, despite this repression, they became serious spaces of critical thought, anti-apartheid activism,
for 10 or 11 months.
and liberation movement.
Significant, all measures of undermining and challenging, her work.
Sorry about that. I've muted that. Karen, please.
No problem. Sorry, Salim, I muted you. Obviously, universities and academics, particularly at the Afrikaner and the white institutions, supported a project called Project Coast, which was basically a chemical and biological weapons project that was used for state repression. So similar to the apartheid state of Israel, science was weaponized in service of South Africa's apartheid ideology. And there are many sources out there already that talk about the close partnership that the apartheid state of South Africa had with the apartheid state of Israel at the time, and how they reinforced and supported each other's ideologies. But one thing that really brought the system to its knees, especially for South Africa, was international academic boycotts and other boycotts targeting apartheid universities, businesses operating in the country. But obviously, Western collaborations persisted. I think Israel was among the last countries to hold out and not boycott South Africa at the time, the US as well, obviously because of their geopolitical alliances. But this entire system that thrived, this entire racial hierarchy in higher education that thrived between 1948 and 1990 has actually created limited accountability. Even in today's higher education space in South Africa, there is still a lot of complicity of universities and academics. You still have Eurocentric ideologies and curricula, neoliberalization. There's still insane amounts of inequality in higher education. Even though there are many government interventions that are aimed at improving access, unfortunately, inequality is still extremely problematic in South African higher education. So because of what happened in South Africa, South African higher education between 1948 and 1990, higher education in South Africa right now remains a site where coloniality and knowledge hierarchies endure. It is a very difficult space to create change, but I think, and it's something that Savo, I'm sure, will touch on as well, is it's very important for us in the global South and around the world to form these sorts of alliances and have platforms and opportunities where we can discuss and acknowledge these very destructive practices, so that it actually provides a space for young scholars too, because a lot of the incoming students ask these sorts of questions, and we really want to work hard not to silence or allow others to silence these young academics. So that was just a very brief overview of the South African higher education system during the apartheid era in South Africa. And so I'll now hand over to Savo, who will offer some comparative reflections, as well as a few closing remarks.
Thank you. So this is really what we are doing in our research. We look at the more general apartheid practices in higher education, more general apartheid practices in South Africa and Israel. We look at it across board. We look at, I mean, of course, we look at various institutions around the world, organizations, global organizations such as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, a number of Israeli institutions and scholars calling what Israel has been doing as a system of apartheid. We look and compare and contrast. We also, quote South Africans who have lived through and struggled against apartheid, such as late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. Him and other South Africans, anti-apartheid activists, when they went to Palestine, when they went to Israel, what they saw shocked them. And for me, it was really, I mean, this whole research has been very disturbing because of the similarities that we have seen. For example, when I read Maya's book, reading how in the early 1940s or throughout the 1940s, the few Zionist institutions that were established at that time in Palestine still worked with is it the Army Corps or something like that, to develop biological and chemical weapons, which would then use during the Nakba once Palestinians were forced out of their lands and their properties. The biological and chemical weapons were used to poison their water sources. So even if people come back, they cannot live and survive on their lands. In the 1970s, we see the same things being done in apartheid South Africa. And what we also find is that scientists from South Africa who were affiliated with South African universities. And even some labs at universities in South Africa, white universities in South Africa at the time, were used to develop chemical and biological weapons to literally kill anti-apartheid activists. And another plan for them was to try and prevent Black women from having babies, to keep the balance of power in a way. I mean, it's a sick way of using science. It's a very inhumane use of science. And the country or the scientific community that provided, the largest amount of support to develop that program in South Africa in the 1970s and 1980s was the Israeli scientific community. And it's also very interesting how, all these things have been happening over time, and we see a lot of parallels, and in our research we reflect on a lot of these different parallels, and there's too many to actually highlight here. But a few things that I'd like to highlight is that this critical analysis, this putting of these two systems and experiences, looking specifically at higher education, putting them next to each other, it really allows us to draw parallels and see countless similarities. And of course, it's not just about similarities. There are also differences as well. There are differences in the ways that South Africa was implementing certain apartheid policies generally, and how Israel has been doing it. But we see so many parallels, and we start to draw some conclusions out of those many parallels. And I think number one is the role of the state in drawing higher education, community, institutions, academia into the broader projects, the settler colonial apartheid projects, ideologically driven. And of course, the state creates this, kind of link through policies and practices and funding and all kinds of other things. But an important aspect that really stood out in our research was that it's not only in the case of South Africa and Israel and higher education being complicit in apartheid oppression and subjugation and othering and epistemic and other forms of violence. It is not just that the state forces the sector to become part of this oppression. It is also that the institutions and the people, not the institutions can't think for themselves. It is the people within those institutions, people who lead them, who design research projects, who teach and who create knowledge, that many, if not most, people within those institutions, particularly the Israeli institutions and historically white universities in South Africa, see themselves as part and parcel of these projects, these ideological projects, and they are guided and driven, in case of South Africa, by white supremacy, and in case of Israel, by the Zionist supremacy. And so we really, cannot just blame the state for forcing. And it's not necessarily even about the forcing. It is about getting the sector on board to become part of this supremacist project. And it really, putting these two systems next to each other, it shows us how how higher education can become a tool, an open tool of oppression, dehumanization, of justification of some of the worst crimes against humanity. And I mean, Maya wrote her book before the current genocide and scholasticide in Gaza, and we have, and she provides so many examples of the way that Israeli higher education has been used to justify, the legal use of different. I mean, it's been used in many ways to develop weapons and also to protect the image, the global image of Israeli state. And one thing I just wanted to say also is that we know. I would say that currently, because of Maya's research and some other people's work, we know more rich detail about the way that Israel and higher education in Israel have been part and parcel of the settler colonial apartheid oppression. we know less about South Africa. And one thing I also wanted to mention is that in this research, we have found things that are so extreme about South African higher education, about the ways in the 70s and the 80s that, universities in South Africa, white universities and white academics were, part and parcel of developing weapons to kill Black people. And we know that because it's public knowledge. During the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process and unearthing of the crimes against humanity in South Africa during apartheid, this was spoken about at these discussions. The Truth and Reconciliation process between 96 and 98 never had a gathering or meeting to talk about the role of higher education in apartheid, but this came through other engagements like that Project Coast. Universities were named, people were named, people who have committed those crimes, real crimes, killed people, said that the entire white higher education sector in South Africa was participating in these crimes. And neither did the government, neither did the TRC, neither did the universities and university leaders up until today wanted to engage with this in detail, to see. And one of the most important things at the end of Maya's book, she speaks about decolonization and the importance of academic boycotts. And this leads me to this last part that we're going to talk about. But one thing I wanted to say, and then two of you hopefully can come in briefly just to talk about the importance of solidarity and academic boycotts and everything else. Towards the end of your book, Maya, you speak about the importance of the struggle and the organizing and the academic boycotts and, trying to decolonize higher education, to decolonize the world and, the way that, we exist in the world. And one important thing when you talk about decolonizing Israel, Palestine, and Israeli higher education, you speak about the importance of accountability. That is one aspect that we have not seen in South Africa. And in my other research, and also towards the end of this research with Naifa, we've been talking about this. And I've been so literally sick observing the silence and indifference at so many South African universities. And I honestly think that in South Africa, there is a responsibility. If we are genuinely talking about being in the post-apartheid period, having that experience, there's a responsibility to speak up when we see similar apartheid oppression elsewhere, and when we see complete eradication of higher education in Gaza and oppression over decades in the West Bank. And I've seen colleagues and institutions completely silent, and I've seen at some institutions in South Africa, colleagues who have spoken out being silenced by the institutions. And that's been really shocking. But at the end of the day, also, I've been asking myself and asking my colleagues, what are we expecting if the South African university is still the same old colonial apartheid university with some smoke screens around, decolonization, using it as a buzzword and all that? If South African university did not decolonize itself, did not get rid of, did not face accountability, are we expecting these institutions to be genuinely committed to work towards justice for some faraway people out there, when many institutions in South Africa don't really care about their Black students going hungry day to day, literally. So I really, I've learned a lot through this process. I've learned a lot from reading Maya's book and working with Naifa on this research. I've learned really bad things, but we need to talk about these things. And I apologize, I was supposed to talk this long towards the end now, but we wanted to, before we get to Q&A, we wanted just to briefly speak about the importance of academic boycotts and global solidarity. And, this was an important aspect of fighting apartheid oppression during South African apartheid. And it's been recognized by Palestinian colleagues who have thought and learned from the South African experience and built a similar movement to put pressure on complicit institutions. But before I end, I just wanted to mention that when we speak about academic boycotts, I think we have seen the silence and silencing in global higher education. We have seen complicity in global higher education. Israeli higher education is not the only problem. And I think when we talk about academic boycotts and solidarities and the movements and putting pressure, it's, I can't only think of boycotting Israeli higher education, complicit institutions, and not think about similarly boycotting German institutions, some institutions in the United States and across the world. So I just wanted us to perhaps in the Q&A also talk about, how academic boycott is perhaps even a bigger project in this moment. Thank you. Either Maya or Naifa, do you want to come in and just briefly speak about academic boycotts?
Sure, I can say a couple of things and then turn it over to you, Naifa. But so thank you so much for all of this, Savo. And I think you raise another important aspect of the comparative discussion, which is what we might learn from the histories of struggle. We all must be students of history when we are trying to build out the thinking and the theories of change that we need in order to achieve the decolonization that we are working towards in higher education and more broadly. So I think you are right to point out a few things that are really important to attend to, particularly those of us based in North America and Europe. That the white supremacy, that imperialism, these are global projects, and of course, under the aegis of the British Empire, so many settler states were founded and still operate today, and including those we are discussing today. And so it is important that we attend not only to the similarities and structures of the sort of embeddedness and imbrication of higher education in colonial violence and colonial infrastructure, but also what might we learn from thinking comparatively about the road ahead and how decolonization is a continuous process, right? And so it's not, our work is never done. So I think that's really important. I want to hear more about that. Certainly, the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, PACB, who first issued the call to boycott Israeli complicit universities back in 2004. So it's over 20 years of this call has been made, and it has largely not been heeded in the Western university system and in Western higher education. And I think, first of all of us, we must acknowledge that we are already over 20 years too late to come to this issue, and that the student encampment movement, and that it was actually students really across Western universities, which are the ones that are in fact sustaining the Israeli system of higher education, right? So you have what used to be called, what is now still Horizon Europe, right? Funding, it's the largest funding source for Israeli universities, grants directly from the EU, and then also collaborations with European and British universities. Of course, you have the United States, both philanthropy and then also the government itself sustaining. So, but in all aspects, the Israeli university system is very Western facing for reasons that we all know. And so it is heavily dependent for its legitimacy, for its funding, for its tenure system, for all of it. It is heavily dependent on the Western academic community. And so that is one of the reasons that PACB and every Palestinian university student and faculty union since has reiterated the call to hold these university systems to account. And those of us based in the very university systems of the West that are in fact facilitating this and holding up this, what PACB has identified as a critical pillar of the settler apartheid regime, and now of course escalated genocide, those of us based in this same university system, first and foremost must heed this call. So yeah, I want to turn it back over to you, Naifa, to think more, about this question. We can talk more in the Q&A.
Savo. Thanks, Maya. So while I have the floor, I just want to take the opportunity to thank our colleague from the University of Johannesburg, someone who's really assisted Savo and I in thinking about this is Anisa Khan. She's from the Internationalization Office. She's been brilliant in helping us think about this international landscape in higher education. She has tons of experience in internationalization, so it's really been brilliant. And I also want to use this opportunity to ask all of you in attendance. I'll leave my email address in the chat. Reach out if there's something you'd like us to add to the paper. If there's something you'd like us to, if there's something you want to contribute. This is a collaborative space. We're definitely open to collaborating with everyone. We have to put our heads together to make some sort of headway. Just in terms of a way forward, because I'm thinking, what can we do in our respective domains in terms of academic boycotts or other sorts of boycotts? So I think universities are so obsessed with SDGs right now, and they're so crazy about, well, at least at the local institutions here in South Africa, linking everything that we do to SDGs. So I think one way that we can really anchor this and other humanitarian causes in the decolonization space is to heavily root these debates in our institutional goals and institutional targets. So, for example, there are various committees across different universities that deal with aspects of decolonization, and these committees are becoming increasingly vocal. A lot of their outputs and the work that they do is actually being linked to institutional objectives. So it becomes very difficult for universities to actually shun these outputs and these contributions, because it actually, for those universities who are crazy about reporting and outputs, it's going to be very difficult for them to deny these things, number one. And number two, I think the least we can do, especially those of us in higher education, is really become a constant voice of reminder. And the reason I say that is because, in the past, before October 7th, I think people were still very polite about this whole thing. In universities, especially in South Africa, the debate wasn't really as prominent as it should have been. And I think the least we can do, people are being killed, people are, losing their loved ones. It's really awful what is going on. And the least we can do is actually raise our voices within our institutions. I know that many people say, oh, you'll be targeted, you'll be, denied promotions. For me, I feel like, well, that's the least I can do in the privileged space that I'm in. So I think more of what we need to do, we also need to reflect together on how we can strengthen some of these causes. Maya shared the information about the Horizon funding source. The more of these funding sources we come to know about, I think the more we can actually expose some of these. And I'm sure there are already tons of reports. Savo, I know you did some work on funding as well, of research and other activities. Maybe you can also brief us a little bit about the funding aspects around this. And then just a link to what Marcina is saying in the chat, the number of African scholars that are silent on the matter. And obviously we all know that there's lots of funding involved. The silence is purchased. But I think there is hope in the South African context, because recently we had the National Research Foundation actually issue a call asking South African academics, so what have you been doing with Palestinian academics? What are the projects out there? Tell us a little bit more about how we can support you. And that is important, because the National Research Foundation in South Africa is one of the key higher education institutions that universities actually obtain funding from, base some of their promotions on some of the NRF criteria. So I think those sorts of institutions, once at least one of them speaks out, I think it creates bravery among others. So I think not long after the National Research Foundation of South Africa sent that questionnaire. We heard from either it was Asaf or Yusuf. I can't remember which one, but one of them via university registrars sent a request to say, what is your university doing for Palestine? And I thought that was great. And I think the NRF, they actually had like an entire form that they sent out, and they asked academics to fill out that form so that they can get an idea of the kinds of support they can offer. So I think when USAF/ASAF sent out that request to university registrars, I think it opens up an opportunity now for universities, especially in the South African and global South context, to start offering their support. But I just want to hear a little bit from Savo about the funding. I know you and a colleague did some work recently on funding. Maybe if you could just give us a little bit more information on that.
Can I jump in? I mean, it's been really important, your dialogue, and you've got so many things you're raising, and there's lots of comments in the chat as well. Would it be okay to go to a broader conversation? I've only got 15 minutes left or less. So if that's okay, I'll just, there's too many questions really to ask to get everyone involved. But I mean, I'm going to just jump in initially with a bit of a historicist question, if that without wanting to be obscure. You're tracing the links between and the parallels between, but I'm particularly interested in the connections that you may have uncovered. I mean, my understanding of the sort of pariah alliance between Israel and South Africa in the 70s. I mean, it led almost, my understanding is, to quite a lot of military and possibly therefore scientific cooperation. The rumors of a joint nuclear explosion. But that must have suggested quite extensive scientific collaborations between Israel and South Africa during that period. Have you found any evidence? I mean, are there any public archives? Has that been discussed at all? Did any of that come out as to whether and how deep these connections were and how formal they were? Were they individual scientists working together, or was this all top secret university, state level stuff?
I can just briefly say, David, so, I mean, we do talk about it in the paper. It's not necessary, it's almost like another project that we would need to do. But we do speak about it in the 70s and the 80s, particularly when there were the sanctions, the UN sanctions against South Africa. There were only a few countries that wanted to work with South Africa at the time, and Israel was one of the countries. And there was extensive collaboration in terms of development of military technologies and weapons, including the development of nuclear weapons in both Israel and South Africa. And the scientific community was part and parcel of that collaboration. And also there's been extensive, so when there were extensive academic boycotts on South African white universities, the countries or the academia from countries such as Israel, West Germany, Britain, US, still collaborated with white universities in South Africa. There was a very strong academic. There was actually quite an extensive collaboration. I mean, I've been reading papers from like 1980s and early 90s to find that link, because in South Africa, for example, nobody really wants to talk about that part, that history of South African higher education. And that's why I said that, we need the detail that Maya was able to present to us through her book about Israeli higher education. We need similar level of critical detail to really learn all this very ugly truth about South African higher education, including the collaboration with Israel. But we have bits and pieces. We have to take it from so many different sources. And nobody in South Africa wants to talk about this. It's almost like, it's done. It's been done in '94. So, shut up and just move on. Everything is fine now.
Okay, interesting. So we've only got 10 minutes. So let's get some people joining the conversation. I'll start at the beginning. Yusuf, you asked a question earlier on. Do you want to come and ask that now?
Time allows?
Yes, please. That's great.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you so much, Naif, Maya, and Savo. I have a simple question. With all the horrifying acts of the genocide that was streamlined online and the whole world watched it, how do Israeli academic institutions and academics themselves justify their involvement in military research and the development of these kind of weapons that are killing the Palestinians to their own faculty members and students? And at the same time, is there any internal resistance to this? Thank you.
Thank you. That is such an important question. So first, just to say, you know, if we understand genocide, as Indigenous scholars and activists have long taught us, if we understand genocide as structural to settler states, we really understand that the last 2 years of genocide have been many, many decades in the making, and that from the outset, the imperative of the Zionist project in settling in historic Palestine, you know, the objective was always to eliminate and replace the Palestinian people. And so we have seen structures put into place very systematically over many decades to make this project possible. And of course, many Palestinians have already been exiled and killed by the Israeli state before October of 2023. So this is just an escalation of a long-standing project. And so then, as our point of departure, we have to begin to disentangle, and this kind of also speaks to both what Savo and Anifa spoke to earlier, which is, you know, how do these institutions reproduce themselves? Like how is this infrastructure sustained over time? And so, you know, this is exactly where the settlers come in. So the institutions don't reproduce themselves. They are produced and reproduced with the willing participation and labor, active labor, right, of the overwhelming majority of settlers in any settler society. Otherwise, the genocidal project could not be sustained, would not persist for as long as it has. And you saw again the last 2 years, we are now in a moment of very tenuous ceasefire. This was not brought on by opposition by the Israeli public. This was externally imposed, right? And so it will have to continue to be externally imposed if we want to and built upon externally, right? This is precisely the theory of change laid out for us by Palestinian civil society, who again took their lessons from the ANC in terms of understanding that a global intervention will be needed because, and we again are students of history, there is not a single solitary case of settlers instigating a process of decolonization. That just has never happened. It always has to be brought on by external force. And so what the Palestinian civil society has been calling for over 2 decades is precisely to generate the international movement and pressure required to begin the process of decolonization in Palestine. And so this is what we see here, and academia in Israel has persisted in its structural, systematic complicity over the last 2 years, just as it has for the decades before. Israeli universities collectively continued to work with Israeli military industries to develop weaponry. Tel Aviv University even had an engineering war room that they founded on campus, right, just for the purpose of supporting the Israeli military during this genocide. Israeli universities collectively offered research opportunities and special benefits and scholarships and even course credit for reserve soldiers returning from Gaza to their classrooms. So in other words, making it possible for them to maintain their status as students and to continue their educational journey while they were participating in genocide. And so, examples abound. So I know we're short on time, but just to say that that systematically, institutionally, Israeli universities have maintained their complicity, which is precisely why PACB and Palestinian academics and students have called on us to intervene.
Thank you very much, Maya and Yusuf. That's really helpful. Given we've only 5 minutes left, let's try and take 3 questions, and then you can respond to any of those when you read. So perhaps Davinia, Zaidi, and Arati, do you want to ask your questions if you're still in the room?
Hi everyone.
Hi, Arati.
Thank you so much to all the presenters for this really powerful session. And my question was about the possibilities of repair and reparation and what lessons, if any, we can think about from the South African case. And I guess I was situating my question with respect to what you were talking about in terms of accountability. Was there anything from that history in South Africa that we could think with in terms of the response now in settler Israel?
Good. Zaidi, do you want to repost your question or raise it in the chat?
Yes, sorry, can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, yes, so I'm a master's student at UCL, and I was recently familiarizing myself with the Dean Miller Tries UCL campaign and sort of about the partnerships that an institution as powerful as UCL hold with Israeli universities, with global arms industries. And yes, I just wanted to learn more about how are partnerships between Western institutions enabling the success of Israeli higher education, and what can we do about that sort of, using our positions in these universities.
Great, thank you so much, Lady, for asking that question. It's a really important one, and thank you for posting it. We go first come first served, so there's so many questions we can't cut to, but Davinia, if you're still on the chat, do you want to summarize your question?
Sure. Thank you. I think in this moment we're really seeing, the propaganda about the peace deal that was really, it came about without Palestinians at the table. We working in international education, we have to encourage dialogue and discussion, but that leads to normalization of epistemic violence and scholasticide. How do we protect against that as higher education institutions?
Okay, so big questions for you all, and not much time, but I'll leave you to try and address some of those. Thank you.
Can I try to respond to the first question about repair and repair? And I think South Africa is not a very good example. The post-apartheid South African experience, particularly in and through higher education, is not a very good example of how the sector can contribute to repair and rebuilding. The neoliberal university is not really interested in that. It's interested in putting all the nice slogans on the websites and posters and, diversity and all that. And they'll drop it as soon as it's not financially viable. But I think what South Africa, if I can say it, teaches us is that the formal end of apartheid and oppression is not the end of the struggle. It requires a continuation of the struggle, perhaps in different ways, shapes and forms. And one thing that Maya mentioned that I really want to emphasize is that while the institutions and many scholars, university leaders, academics, researchers have been a shocking disappointment, this is not the first time that they are a shocking disappointment. If you think about Vietnam War, if you think about South African apartheid, if you think about neoliberalization of higher education, if you think about scholasticide in Gaza, they have not been, many of them, on the right side of history. Students have been in all those and other examples. Progressive students have been on the right side of history, and they are again on the right side of history. They were on the right side of history in 2015 and 2016 in South Africa. And so there is still hope, but the struggle is going to be a long one. And in South Africa, the struggle to decolonize universities started now a decade ago, and it will probably go for the next 2 decades. And then we will see whether anything has been won. So I think that is the lesson from South Africa.
Right.
I can speak briefly, and then I want to make sure Naifa, you can also say respond to some of these questions. But so just briefly to some of the questions, I will say again, if we understand, if we take seriously the call from Palestinian civil society that has identified the Israeli university system as a pillar of settler colonialism and of apartheid rule and now of genocide, then the question then becomes, what makes that pillar sustainable? And what makes that pillar sustainable in the Israeli case is the Western academic community. Because again, academic systems are very entangled, and so they rely heavily on fellowships, on funding, on publications, and in platforms hosted by all of these institutions. And so you see, you know, the consistent resistance of these administrations to heed the call of students, faculty, staff, the overwhelming majority of people on these campuses who do want accountability and do want to take these crucial and necessary steps. You see this resistance, and that resistance is something that we have to contend with. We have to think about, again, global white supremacy. We have to think about the deep identification with Israel that is held still overwhelmingly in certain sectors of the West. We have to think about also what I think of as sort of settler alliances, right? In particular, you see, you know, in the United States and in Canada, among white settlers in South Africa, you see there's these deep identifications with Israelis, right? And the sort of alliances among settler states and among those who defend settler projects. So that's also something we have to attend to and to take seriously when we're power mapping and when we're trying to understand why these pillars are sustained in the ways that they are, and to name that. And I also, you know, want to say, you know, again, one thing that should be that in addition to boycott, that should be continually spoken about in our campuses, is that what Israel has tried very systematically to do is to isolate Palestinian academia. And so many academics and students in the West have never met a Palestinian scholar, and that is by design. And so that's part of the dehumanization that makes it easier to dehumanize Palestinians in the West. And I think it's really important to not allow Israel to continue to forcibly isolate Palestinian higher education. And so I'm going to put in the link, put a link.
You just muted yourself, Maya. So we can see that now. Sorry, Maya, you've muted yourself. Can you hear us?
Oh, sorry. I put a link in the chat so that folks can learn about how to support the efforts of Palestinian academics to rebuild their universities in Gaza.
Great, thank you. We must wrap up, but Naika, you must have the last word as well. Please do come in.
Thanks, everyone. So I think just to touch on the first question, the lessons. So I think isolation is key. I think we can't deny Israel's explicit involvement in all of this. We have to isolate them. It's as simple as that. But obviously, we operate in this ecosystem where we've become dependent on funding, you know, from US organizations, funding agencies, European funding agencies. We have to think of alternative ways to fund ourselves. And I think there are instances, especially in South Africa, where there are NGOs and other organizations who are getting together to help universities fill some of those funding shortfalls, you know, especially when they've spoken out and they've lost funding. So I think even institutions in the Global South need to mobilize and bring our funding together so that we do become less reliant on a lot of these external funders, because obviously where you get your money from dictates what you can and cannot say. So I think that is the biggest issue right now that I think we do need to focus on in terms of lessons between the two regimes. Thanks, David.
Good. Well, thank you very much for being brief, and thank you all, everyone, for joining. I can see that it's been some difficult conversations happening in the chat function, but thank you all for contributing to that. And as Lee points out, we did have a quite a research-informed webinar last year looking at the experiences of Palestinian, Arab Israelis undergraduates on Israeli campuses that you may be interested to go back and listen to again. Thank you again, Sarah, for organising this, and Maya for joining us early night, for joining us in Johannesburg. This will be recorded and will be available. Please keep joining us every week. We really want to have a range of different types of webinars, from research focused to more sort of dialogical roundtables. So this has been really important, and these are issues that we need to keep thinking about. Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.